Good evening. My name is David Hutton and I'm the Chairperson of the Australian Catholic Superannuation and Retirement Fund. On behalf of the Board, executives and staff of Australian Catholic Superannuation, I'd like to welcome you to the Fund's inaugural annual member meeting. Our external auditor from KPMG is also present. We're pleased you've joined us this evening and we hope that you and your families are well in what can only be described as a very challenging year. Your safety and well-being during the pandemic is important to us, hence the reason for conducting this meeting virtually. This event is an opportunity for you to hear from the Fund's leadership team on the Fund's performance and operations and to ask questions of them. To ensure the meeting runs smoothly for everyone, we've muted your microphones. If you have any questions, you're welcome to submit them via the chat window on your screens, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session of today's meeting. If we run out of time to answer all questions raised, we'll include our response to your questions in the minutes, which we'll publish on our website within the next 30 days. I'd like to start the meeting with a prayer. God of all peoples, you inspire us by the courage of our pioneers and enrich us by the ancient wisdom of the Indigenous people who first inhabited this land. Through the intercession of Mary of the Southern Cross, may all who live within our shores be gathered together to form one people. We pray especially at this time for all who are affected, directly or indirectly, by the current pandemic. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. We would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting is being held and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Today you'll hear from our Chief Executive Officer, Greg Cantor, our Chief Investment Officer, Michael Block, and me about the Fund's operations and highlights, how your investments have performed over the past financial year, and the future plans for the Fund. The past year has been a difficult one for our nation as Australians experience bushfires, floods, and a health crisis. Concern regarding COVID-19 led to a short, sharp downturn in economic conditions, with a severe rise in unemployment and a major correction in equity markets in early 2020. Consequently, we finished the year with $9.3 billion in funds under management, representing a 0.6% increase compared to the 2018-19 year. As our Chief Investment Officer Michael will cover later, the Fund has taken a conservative approach and implemented several measures prior to the health crisis, which helped to soften the full impact that the COVID-19 storm would otherwise have had on your investments. During the financial year, we noted a number of inactive accounts with low balances or which received no contributions over an extended period. To prevent our members' balances from falling further as a result of fees, we have written to these members to close their accounts, resulting in a 6% fall in our membership base to around 86,000 members. To ensure our members are engaged with their super, we've implemented a range of marketing initiatives during the financial year and the results have been pleasing. 1,700 members rolled more than 3.5 million of their super into our fund. 115 members opened pension accounts, bringing more than 25 million into our fund. During the financial year, we also implemented a number of initiatives which were part of industry-wide changes. First, the government's temporary change to early release of super rules enabled eligible members impacted by COVID-19 to withdraw up to 10,000 to June 2020 and a further withdrawal of 10,000 from the 1st of July. The Fund made 2,827 payments to the value of $23.5 million in the first tranche of early release payments. Despite these withdrawals, we maintained the Fund's liquidity position and normal business operations. Second was a reduction in pension minimum drawdown rates. To soften the negative effect that the COVID-19 crisis is having on retirees' account balances, the government temporarily reduced the minimum annual payment required for account-based pensions and annuities by 50% during the financial year. The Fund assisted over 500 members who opted to take up this change prior to the 1st of July 2020. We've also provided members with advance notice that their withdrawal rates would automatically be reduced to the minimum from the 1st of July 2020. Third, the first part of the government's Protecting Your Superannuation changes became effective on the 1st of July 2019 to protect members' super savings, particularly those with low account balances, from being eroded. These changes included the cessation of automatic insurance for members with inactive accounts with balances less than $6,000. Earlier this year, the second part of the changes became effective, affecting the offering of automatic insurance to members under the age of 25. The fund communicated with affected members about these changes prior to the legislated deadline so they could make informed decisions based on their individual situations. The Financial Services Royal Commission highlighted that little was being done to address risks to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's financial security, nor to provide culturally appropriate information about financial products, particularly to people living in remote communities. As a result, Australian Catholic Superannuation launched its Reconciliation Action Plan on the 30th of July 2020. Our inaugural RAP formalises our commitment to ensure that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members live their best possible retirement. In terms of our fund's focus for the next couple of years, we continue to look for sustainable ways to strengthen our services to meet our members' needs and achieve economies of scale. By now, many of you would have heard about the planned merger between Australian Catholic Super and NGS Super. The merger, which is planned to occur in early 2022, is subject to finalisation of comprehensive due diligence and assessment of member benefits. The merger will create a $21 billion superannuation fund with approximately 200,000 members servicing independent and Catholic schools and the community services sector across Australia. Importantly, the merged entity will continue to be a profit-to-member fund, run to benefit you, our members. Both funds value their strong connections to the Catholic Church and its ethos, and these will be retained in the merged fund. The merging of the funds will ensure the future security and sustainability of benefits to the members of both funds and deliver improved services and economies of scale. In conclusion, I thank my fellow directors, the management and staff of the fund for all their efforts in ensuring we continue to look after our members' best interests during a challenging year. The board, management and staff thank you, our members, for your continued support. I'll now hand over this meeting to our Chief Executive Officer, Greg Cantor, who will share several highlights about the fund during the past year.
Thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. It has been an extraordinary year with events such as the bushfires, floods and coronavirus affecting many of our members and their families. I want to stress that our staff are here to help you in any way we can. While some members may be concerned about the uncertainties posed by COVID-19, I encourage you to take a long-term view of your super. Over the fund's almost 40-year history, we've observed that having an investment strategy for the long term and riding out market volatility can deliver the best outcomes for our members. Every individual's circumstances are different, so if you're unsure or need some guidance about your finances, you may like to speak to one of our in-house financial advisors. I would like to make the point that they are salaried officers and do not get paid commissions. Similar to many organisations, the past year has been a challenging one for the fund, but there have also been many positives, which I am proud to share with you now. The past year has seen continued improvement in our investment returns, such that the 3-year performance of our diversified options is at or above median. Additionally, the conservative balanced option, our previous MySuper default investment option, returned 0.54% for the financial year and 6.25% per annum over the past 10 years. Other options that have made strong positive returns in a difficult environment over the past year after fees and taxes include our bonds option at 5.6 8%. According to Super Ratings, an independent superannuation research and consulting company, our fund's bonds option ranked as the #1 performing diversified fixed interest option among super funds over 1 and 3 years to the 30th of June. Our capital stable option was 2.25%, our credit income option 2.06%, and our conservative investment option 1.93%. Since we launched our new member portal in September 2019, we've had an overwhelming success with over 26,000 member registrations and more than 350,000 logins. During the year, we continue to improve the online member experience for you, our members, so that it's easy for you to stay up to date with your super. We launched our award-winning Retire Smart account-based pension in 2015 to enable our members to draw a regular income while growing capital over time. During the past year, we improved this product with a focus on income-paying investments so that it aligns more closely with the income requirements of our retired members. The fund moved from weekly to daily unit pricing in March 2020. This provides more accurate and timely unit prices for member accounts in line with industry best practice. Our fund was voted the 3rd best superannuation fund in the country for most satisfied members in a survey conducted by Investment Trends, an independent market research company for the financial services industry. Over 84% of our members surveyed rated the fund as either good or very good. One of the things that sets us apart from most super funds is our self-administered fund, which includes an in-house call centre team which only services our fund's members. This means that each member who calls us can receive local, focused and personalised services from our member services team. During the financial year, our member services team attended to 67,000 calls from members, an increase of over 10% compared to the previous year. They also responded to over 28,000 emails from members, which is 30% more than 2018-19. We pride ourselves on good member services, which is why we are delighted that our member services team is a finalist in the Customer Services Institute of Australia Awards for the 5th year running. After winning the Australian Business Award for Employer of Choice last year, the fund has once again won an Employer of Choice Award, this time with Human Resource Director. We are also a finalist in the Australian Business Awards again this year. The results become known on the 8th of October. I am proud that we have an engaged, dedicated and happy employees because this means that they will continue to deliver even better outcomes for our members, despite the extraordinary times we are experiencing. The culture, values and behaviours of our fund have long been established, and awards from external parties help to solidify and acknowledge our strong ethos to be exemplars in our industry. I'd like to thank our board, executive and staff for their efforts over what has been a most challenging year. As the Chairman stated in his address, we have a major focus on achieving the merger by the end of next year. As CEO, I look forward to undertaking this major task which will enhance our member outcomes. I also thank you, our members, for your continued loyalty to our fund. I encourage you to stay up to date with the latest developments about your super or our fund via our website and social media channels. I'll now hand you over to Michael Block, our Chief Investment Officer, who will provide an overview of how the fund managed your investments against the backdrop of volatile markets in the past year. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, and good evening, everyone. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in significant and unexpected impacts on economies worldwide. In addition to super funds, numerous businesses have been affected by the ongoing health crisis. An important thing to remember is that super is a long-term investment with the aim of providing Australians with a source of income during their retirement. We understand that members may be concerned about their super balances, particularly for those who are retiring or are in retirement and consequently have a much shorter period for their super to recover from any market volatility. Although members should consider their own circumstances when making investment decisions, the 2007 global financial crisis serves as a useful reminder that the markets will eventually recover. Our fund has 14 investment options to suit members' differing investment objectives, risk tolerances and investment timeframes. For members in our default Lifetime 1 option, their super is automatically invested in safer assets as they approach retirement, therefore reducing their exposure to risk. During the financial year, Lifetime 1 delivered a 0.7% return for members aged 51 to 60 and 1.8% for those aged 61 and above. For younger members, their losses were capped at 1.29%, a result that was aligned with the fund's short-term expectations after taking into account the wild fluctuations in investment markets during the second half of the financial year. Our conservative balanced option, which is the most popular amongst members who have selected an option, delivered a positive return of 0.5% for the financial year. It also retained its competitive return of 6.3% for the 10 years to 30 June 2020, a result that is consistent with the performance of similar options in the industry during the same period. Each week, our investment team reviews the fund's investment portfolios to help members maximise the returns against the risks of their investments. This review also ensures that the team aligns its decisions with the fund's long-term investment strategy. At the start of the financial year, the fund reduced its exposure to equities as shares were overpriced by historic standards and economic fundamentals struggled to justify those high prices. Although the global pandemic was unexpected, the adjustments that the fund had made to its portfolios earlier in the year prepared its investments for the downturn as stock markets fell from historic highs. This approach resulted in the fund's diversified options performing in line or above those of other funds in March, therefore reducing the impact of declining stock values on our members' super. After a sudden 34% fall in the US stock market, a number of quality shares were sufficiently discounted, which enabled the fund to increase its holdings in equities towards the end of March. With interest rates reaching historic lows during the financial year, the ability for bonds to perform as they had in the past was diminished. The fund reduced its exposure to bonds, preferring corporate debt with higher expected returns. With the US dollar prone to appreciating against the Australian dollar during times of economic uncertainty, this trend was also seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the Australian dollar reached a low of 55 cents against the US dollar, before recovering in line with equity markets. By purchasing international assets in US dollars and gaining exposure to foreign currency, the fund was able to minimise the impact of the share market sell-off on its overseas investments during the year. Additionally, to help you maximise their returns, we've invested in small, profitable companies valued at less than $2.6 billion. As a smaller super fund, we've been able to use our size to our advantage by buying shares in these companies which bigger super funds would not be able to invest in due to regulatory requirements. One of the companies we've invested in is Marley Spoon, whose services have been in demand as consumers focused on food delivery and cooking at home during the pandemic. We've also purchased shares in Kogan. Its products have also increased in popularity given the growth of online shopping. We also continue to increase our environmental, social and governance footprint, as this is becoming a more important matter with members and the community. As part of our journey to implement responsible investment practices, we collaborate with like-minded organisations such as the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors, which collectively represents 33 Australian investors, to strengthen corporate engagement on ESG issues, the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investing, a global body that promotes responsible investment, and the Investor Group on Climate Change, a collaboration of the region's investors focusing on the impact that climate change has on the financial value of investments. We also offer the Socially Responsible Investment option, which we debuted in 2002. This option did very well, outperforming our other diversified strategies and delivering a strong positive return of 2.91% for the year to June 2020. This option is currently invested with Australian Ethical, one of Australia's leading ethical fund managers. During the financial year, we also hired our first ESG officer to overlay an environmental, social and governance approach across our investment portfolios. Despite shares regaining their pre-pandemic values towards the end of the financial year, we remain cautious in our approach to investing members' retirement savings, as the uncertainties posed by COVID-19 continue to be a risk to investment markets and global economies in the near future. Thank you all for your continued trust in Australian Catholic Super.
Thank you, Michael and Greg, for your updates. That brings us to the question and answer section of the annual member meeting. This is your opportunity to ask questions about all areas of the fund's performance and operations. We provided you with the opportunity to submit any questions as part of the registration process and also throughout the meeting today via the chat function. We will aim to answer all of your questions today. However, if time does not permit us to answer everything, we will respond to all appropriate questions in the minutes of the meeting within 1 month, and these will be placed on the fund's website in addition to the full recording of today's meeting. Due to the pandemic, I'm currently streaming into the meeting from Brisbane. As such, I'll now hand to our CEO, Greg Cantor, who is in Sydney to host the question and answer session. At the conclusion of the question and answer session, Greg will hand back to me to close the meeting.
Thank you, David, and good evening out to our members. Well, we have a number of questions that have come in, and the first one I will answer. It's from John from New South Wales, who has asked, what is the timetable for the merger between Australian Catholic Super and non-government school super? And the other part of it is, when will we be advised regarding the difference in charges when we combine the two accounts? To start this journey, it started in roughly March, and there was a number of legal hurdles we had to overcome, and those have been done now, and we're at the process of beginning our due diligence. This due diligence will take place over a number of months, and at the end of that, we will be in a position to be able to definitively tell our members what the charges, etc. will be. We cannot do that at the moment because we have to join these two funds together, and that's it for that question, and I will look for another question, and who will answer that? Michael from Western Australia has also a question on the merger, and I'll pass over to David. His question is, why has the fund amalgamated with another fund? Thank you, David.
Thanks, Michael, for your question. Well, there are a number of reasons. Firstly, at the big picture level, it's important to understand that there's a major consolidation going on in the superannuation industry, particularly post the Banking Royal Commission. We're being urged to look at our costs and our returns, and it's certainly the case that smaller funds are going to have some difficulty managing their costs. Now, we're not a small fund, and neither is NGS. We're a medium-sized fund, but we're looking ahead to the future, and we're seeing that some of the costs don't vary a lot depending on the number of members. They're the same for any super fund. An example would be some of our compliance costs, some of our digital costs. If we're spreading those costs across 200,000 members as opposed to just 86,000 members, then there's going to be a clear benefit to our members. Similarly, we've got, so that's both administration and investment costs. Also, we hope that there'll be some investment opportunities that might open up to us being a larger fund, over $20 billion. So there are a number of reasons why we're doing it. It's always about member benefit, and we're trying to get, as is NGS, to get ahead of the game so that we're making sure that our members are not disadvantaged in any way. But the final key point is to say, while we want to be bigger, we want to scale up to some extent because we believe that will be a financial benefit to our members, we don't wish to be a mega fund. We want to remain a niche fund that continues to have a positive relationship with our members. We know where most of our members work, what type of, whether they're in schools, community services, Catholic agencies and other similar agencies. We've got a very strong relationship with them. NGS has a similar understanding of the members in their fund. So while we believe there are some very practical benefits to scaling up, we also believe that staying into that middle ground, we will also be able to maintain a very positive relationship with our members. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, David. Next question is from William in Queensland, and he would like to know, to Michael, how did you protect the fund or are protecting the fund during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thanks very much, Greg, and thank you very much, William, for this very important question, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk about it. Our aim at Australian Catholic Super is to grow our members' retirement savings as safely as possible, and we take this obligation very seriously. We had a two-pronged approach to protecting our members' savings. Firstly, earlier in the year, we thought that prices were very high, property and share prices, and that bonds, the interest rates were very low. And so we took a conservative stance that held up very well throughout the COVID period. Additionally, our default option, Lifetime One, put all of our older members who have less time to retirement and have less time to recoup any losses into more conservative, risk-controlled strategies. So in a very turbulent and difficult environment where a lot of options lost money in the February to April period, our members lost less money, and that means we protected their retirement savings better than most. Additionally, as Chairman Hutton said, during March, when prices were cheap, we bought some additional equities and some additional Australian dollars, which has meant that our full year performance has also done well. So thank you very much again for the question, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, there's another question for you. Philip in New South Wales has asked, how is the fund's investment performance going?
Thanks again, Greg, and thank you very much, Philip. And I'm very proud to let everyone know that our investment performance has been very strong and continues to improve each month. To give you some examples, our performance over the short term, medium term and long term is very good. Our 10-year performance of our flagship fund, our MySuper investment option, is 6.26% and at or above median. Our 3-year performance is above average for every diversified option, and our 6-month performance is also very good as we recover from COVID. There were also some other highlights, as were mentioned by Chairman Hutton, and these include some particular areas that are doing very well. Our property option is the #1 superannuation property option over 1, 3 and 5 years. Our ESG option made 2.91% for the year to June 30 and did very well, beating all of our other diversified options, which shows that you can do good and do well at the same time. And in particular, our conservative options did very well, being first and second quartile over every period over the last 10 years. Just because we protected your savings a little bit better than most doesn't mean we're resting on our laurels. It's a very difficult and turbulent time, with COVID still being a major health, economic and social crisis, and we're working very hard to try and design portfolios that will navigate the times ahead. So thanks again, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. There's a question from Tom from Queensland, and he has asked, does the fund offer financial advice? And what advice do we have, and what are the costs? I'll answer this. We have two types of investments. We have limited advice and comprehensive advice. The limited advice is free, and it has three major areas. One is contributions, and members can get benefit from seeking salary sacrifice advice. The other one is investments, where the limited advice people talk to them about member investment choice options. And the next one is insurance, and that is about looking at what type of insurance, the amounts that you need to best suit your financial needs. And the other one is comprehensive advice. Comprehensive advice covers really individuals' own needs and wants, and that gives advice from things like Centrelink, estate planning, etc. And the costs of that are not free, and the average cost of that over the last 12 months has been roughly $1,700 per plan. But I remind people that what I said during my speech was that our financial planners are salaried. They don't get commissions, and that makes a big difference, I believe. So hopefully, Tom, I've answered your question. The next one it's a multi-pronged question from Jeanette from New South Wales. Has a number of questions on the merger. And I'll ask David to answer this, but I'll go through those questions first. What is happening with the merger with NGS? When will the merge? Why are we merging? Was one of the funds in difficulty? If so, which one? Will more of the members after the merger be a good reason cost-wise to bring back the fantastic app what disappeared mid last year for a very friendly user website? So David, would you like to answer those questions please to Jeanette?
Yeah, thanks Jeanette for your question. Well, I've already explained a little bit of why we're doing it. We believe there'll be significant practical benefits in terms of cost reductions, all being well, given that cost, at least relative to our peers. Was any one of the funds in difficulty? Certainly not. I can assure you Australian Catholic Super is not in difficulty, and neither is NGS. And if you want some evidence of that, look at both our websites and you'll see that both funds are highly rated by the independent rating agencies. In our own case, not only are we highly rated, we have a number of the highest ratings from the independent ratings agencies, like Chant West. Have a look at our ratings from Super Ratings. No, neither fund is any difficulty. As I said in my earlier comments, what we're trying to do is get ahead of the game and to make sure that we're well prepared for the future at the moment. Will there be a good reason to bring back the app? That's an interesting question. We've had a fair bit of feedback about the app, and I know a lot of people have commented that they miss the app. But we did have some issues around security and needing to upgrade our website and our portal, and those things have now been done. But certainly I can say that the app is on the agenda. We're looking at whether that's possible. But certainly these technological developments are really important to us. And they're not cheap, I need to say, but we also need to make sure these are our websites, and our apps, of course, have to be incredibly secure because we're dealing with your money. And so it's important that whatever we develop is of the highest possible quality and extremely secure. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, David. We have another question coming up from Chris from New South Wales, who wants to know, how did our life cycle product, Lifetime One, perform over the recent downturn? Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you, Chris, for the question. Lifetime One came in March 2018 so it's been in operation for 2 years. And over the COVID crisis, it did exactly what it was expected to do. It placed our older members into lower risk strategies and protected their savings more than the average super fund. To quote some numbers for you, in the period from February to April 2020, the average super fund lost about 9.3%. And for our older members, they still lost money, but far less than that, more like 3, 4 and 5%. And as you would have seen in Chairman Hutton's address, he put some numbers up for how the average 50 and 60-year-old went. So we're extremely pleased that this award-winning product has had a chance to show its wares in very turbulent times, and it's come out showing that it did the job exceptionally well. Thanks again, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. There's another question for you, Michael. Louise from the Australian Capital Territory wants to know, what is the expected returns after the amalgamation with NGS?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Louise. That's a very interesting question. At the moment, all of our 14 investment options in our public disclosure documents give out details of expected returns, objectives, risks, fees, etc. And when our fund is merged, we will have a new suite of products taking the best from both funds, where we'll make exactly the same disclosures. NGS is also a well-performed super fund, so I'd expect that we'd get the best from both worlds. In terms of giving you an exact number, until such time as we've determined what the new suite of products is, I can't give you that information just yet, but rest assured that as soon as those are determined, every member will be given details of the new products, their expected returns, risks, fees, etc. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael. There's another question from Paul from New South Wales, and he's asked, I have a policy with NGS too. Will my insurance cover be transferred as per NGS cover? I will attempt to answer this question. So one of the things is that with a merger, no member of the fund who has insurance will be worse off. Our insurer and the insurer from NGS, whoever becomes the main insurer in the future, will make certain that whatever the insurance of the two policies would be guaranteed by that new insurer. So in other words, if I had a policy which was, gave me cover of $100,000 and the NGS policy had another $100,000, then the number of units would equal the $200,000. That's if you, Paul, want to have that much insurance in the future, but you will not be worse off. So with that, I'll wait for any more questions that might come through. There's a question here from Jared from Queensland that's just come up, and he's asked another question on the merger. What are the implications of a merger between ACS and the other super fund for members of ACSRF? What benefits, and are there any negatives? David, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Look, I think I've covered some of the issues around benefits. As I said, we believe there will be some very tangible benefits in terms of scaling up that certainly costs of compliance, the digital transformation, all of those things that every super fund in the country has to manage are on the rise. So we need to manage our costs, as we said, by spreading them over 200,000 members rather than just 86. We believe there will be very significant benefits. And we said we also believe we'll be forming a truly national fund represented across the country, and that we also retain that highly relational model of customer service that we have. Are there any negatives? Well, I can't think of any at the moment. We're certainly working through all the issues, and as Greg said in relation to the previous question, one of the tests we have to make sure is that no member is going to be disadvantaged in this move of either fund. That's a requirement by law, in fact. So we need to make sure that that's in fact going to be the case. There's a lot of work going on between now and when the two funds actually merge. As Greg said, we're doing what's called the detailed due diligence. There are a lot of issues to be sorted out. We've already done preliminary due diligence and high-level member assessment. So we have independent advice, both funds have done this, to indicate that we should move ahead into this stage, and now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of all of that. And that's why it's going to take us nearly a year or more to do that. But we can't think of any negatives that we see. We see a lot of upside in the two funds coming together. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, David. There's a question from Clive from Western Australia, and he has asked, Michael, how does capital stable hold up in a sudden fall in the markets?
Thanks, Greg, and thank you, Clive. As you'd know, our fund has many older members, me included. I'm 58 and have reached preservation age, so I'm very interested to know how our risk control strategies work in a downturn, such as the one we've just had. Given that this downturn, COVID, was a sudden, severe downturn, and virtually every market was affected, bonds, corporate credit, property and equities, just about every single option suffered some drawdowns, but I'm very pleased to tell you that our capital stable option held up way better than most. Once again, to quote some figures, it made a positive return across the financial year to June 2020. It held up very, very well throughout the February to March period, only losing a fraction of the amount of money that the average super fund lost, something like 3 or 4% instead of 9.3%. So just like everyone who's in the capital stable option, we lost some money, but it was way less than we would have lost if we were in more aggressive options. And I think that's the idea for us older members who want to protect our retirement savings. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. Waiting on another question to come up. Chris in Queensland asks, does this merger affect your connection with the Catholic Church? David, as our chairman, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That's an important question, an important issue for all of us in Australian Catholic Super. But can I make the point that both NGS and Australian Catholic Super are the only two superannuation funds in the country with a formal connection to the Catholic Church. NGS currently has 2 members of its board directly appointed by the Catholic Church. Currently, out of our 12 directors, 6 of them are nominated directly by the Catholic Church. Moving into the merger, we have already agreed that there will continue to be several positions on our new board that will be have a formal connection, and the process of getting those people to the board will be through nomination or appointment by the Church. So that connection is a really important one for us, and it's not just important in a technical sense, it's very much about the ethos, and I think both funds understand as we go forward that that connection is an important one. The other thing we value is, while we've got it's important to a lot of our members that we have that connection because they work for the Catholic Church, particularly in the case of Australian Catholic Super, but as I've said also for some of the NGS members. But the other issue is we keep a very close contact with the employers, and we value our relationship with the employers, and it's important for us to be able to assure the employers that what we are providing them is an ethical, values-based, high-performing fund, and we hope to continue that into the future. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, David. Another question coming up on the screen. Susan from Queensland has a question about our socially responsible option. Michael, you might like to answer this. What would be the advantages of choosing the socially responsible option over the growth option, for example, or a capital stable option, or any other option for that matter?
Thanks very much, Greg, and thank you, Susan, for that very topical question. As you would have heard earlier, we are making great strides in increasing our socially responsible footprint. I'm very pleased to say that our socially responsible option made the highest return of our diversified options for the year ended 30 June. That was 2.91%. When it comes to choosing any option, Susan, I'd strongly recommend that you find the option that best suits you and you stay the course. And as you'd know, you can speak to a financial planner or get some intra-fund advice to do that. To give you a bit of a head start, just detailing the differences between them, our socially responsible option is for those people that want to make a very strong statement in relation to ethical investing. It has no fossil fuels, no tobacco, divests itself of some banks, controversial weapons, and a whole pile of other controversial areas. You can read all about it on Australian Ethical's investment charter. It's a little bit different from a standard growth option. It's a little bit less aggressive than a standard growth option and more like a balanced option. And the capital stable option is a little bit less aggressive than our socially responsible option. So I think it's very important to find the one that's right for you and that would suit your purposes. So I urge you to, for instance, call our helpline on 1300 658 766 and make an appointment, and or read our PDS, which outlines the risks and returns of each of those excellent options. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. Waiting for another question to come up. Oh, Michael, you're very popular. Margaret from Western Australia asks, when do you think banks will be in the position to pay dividends again?
So thank you, Greg, and thank you, Margaret. That's a very interesting question because many of our members have shares in banks either within their super, because they make up a very large percentage of the Australian equity market, or maybe they hold shares in Commonwealth Bank and other banks that privatised. Both the Australian and New Zealand governments have introduced rules to limit the dividends that banks would pay, and they're likely to limit them to 50% of the profit that any bank makes. So to answer your question directly, I think that in a very low return world, when banks make less margin on mortgages, that banks will make less profits than they did in the past, but I still think they will be in a position to pay dividends, but probably at a slightly lower level than they did in the past. The extraordinary action taken by 2 or 3 of the major Australian banks to put a temporary stop on dividends is exactly that. It was just a temporary stop to shore up their capital position. And whilst I don't have a crystal ball and don't know exactly how everything's going to proceed, my best guess is that banks will be in a position to pay dividends, albeit at a slightly lower payout ratio than they did in the past. Thanks again for the question, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. Robert from Western Australia would like to know, what kind of companies does the fund invest in? Michael, would you like to answer this again?
Thanks, Greg. Well, depending on which option you're in, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the money is invested in equities and shares, roughly half-half internationally and in Australia. We publish on the website the list of the top 10 companies we invest in, and they're pretty much exactly as you'd expect. In Australia, we have the major companies like CSL, the 4 banks, Rio, Woolworths, etc. Internationally, obviously, we have a smattering of the large tech companies and most major American companies, as well as investments in emerging markets. If you wanted some commentary about what our exposure might look like, at the moment, we have a little bit less than usual in the technology companies that we regard as very expensive, and a little bit more in non-US stocks, particularly emerging markets. And in Australia, we have a slight leaning towards some of the smaller companies that are doing well in this environment. As we detailed before, companies like Marley Spoon, Kogan, a few biotechnology companies, etc. But most of our top 10, as I said, are detailed on the website right now. Thanks again, Robert.
Michael, before we, there's another question comes up. Just on that previous question, I might ask you a question that is mine, really to help you answer this. We're going to have a merger of NGS and it'll be 21 billion. A lot of funds who get to a certain size can't invest in small companies, etc. But what size of the fund do you think would be where that becomes a problem for a fund of a $21 billion fund?
Thanks, Greg. It's obviously something I've thought long and hard about, and we'll be giving you some more advice in the future. The very short answer is that one of the benefits of working for Australian Catholic Super and NGS as well is that we are not too large and we can still take advantage of niche markets. For example, small capitalised companies, for example, emerging markets, hybrids, emerging market debt, etc. My best guess is that once you get to about $40 or $50 billion, it then starts getting very difficult to invest in small strategies, because investing 100 or 200 million doesn't really move the dial. So where we're going to end up at about $21 billion, and for the foreseeable future, as we hope to grow to 30 or 40 or even slightly above that, I think we're probably the perfect size. We're small enough to take advantage of niche markets and large enough to take advantage of some economies of scale.
Thanks very much, Michael. We've had another question come in from Kevin from New South Wales, who has asked the question, was there a significant drawdown on the super by the fund's members during the government allowing early access? And has this impacted on the fund's performance and returns?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Kevin. The early release scheme had very little effect on our fund. To give you a number, most of our members are full-time, and there was only a small amount that was released to our members, certainly less than 0.5% of the fund's total assets under management. This is very small in relation to some other funds. Those funds with younger demographics or itinerant workers, for instance, baristas, janitors, etc., suffered much higher downturns in the 3 to 5%. So luckily for us, our members chose to leave their money with us, and as I said, less than 0.5% was taken out. In terms of how it impacted the fund's performance, really there were only two things that kept me awake at night, and that was making sure that we had enough liquidity to meet all those demands, because we didn't know what they were going to be when the government first introduced them. And I can say to you that our fund is very safe and very liquid and has enough money to meet all future redemptions. And in terms of the performance impact, believe it or not, it was actually positive. And that is because we had liquidity put aside because we thought markets were expensive. We were able to put some of that back into the market when prices were lower in March, and that's why our 6-month figures have been so good recently. So thanks again, Kevin, and back to you, Greg.
Thank you. There's a question from on the board. Rita from New South Wales would like to know, what happens with my account between now and the merger of NGS? I'll answer this question. So Rita, it's business as usual for both Australian Catholic Super and NGS. So for the next year or so, as David Hutton said before, we'll be conducting our deeper due diligence. And so for the year, certainly the year ending 21, you'll get statements from Australian Catholic Super, as will the members of NGS. The following year, it would be expected that those accounts will be amalgamated. So it's just, for the next year, it is just business as usual. Thank you. John from New South Wales asks, you have promoted your investment in shopping centres recently, or previously, sorry. So how has this been impacted by COVID? Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, John. As you would all know, the traffic in shopping centres and even office buildings are different today as they were in the past. We still have some investments in shopping centres and airports and office buildings, but literally from a year ago, we started reducing our exposure in those areas. So we also have investments in renewable infrastructure, in warehouses, in industrial properties, and even a little bit of residential. So in terms of bricks and mortar shopping centres, I don't think their turnover in the future will be as big as they have been in the past, and they have suffered a diminution of value of 5 to 10%. And this is largely an effect of COVID, and we're continually looking at the mix of property and infrastructure to try and get the best mix. But as one door shuts, another door opens, and we're slowly moving our emphasis away from shopping centres and office buildings to other properties in infrastructure. But as I'm sure you'd understand, because these are unlisted investments, it can take a little while to make that happen. Thanks again, John, and back to you, Greg.
Thanks, Michael. Anne-Marie from New South Wales is asking, what is the date of the merger between NGS and Australian Catholic Super? And in future, what will the superannuation fund be called? Well, as David Hutton said earlier, the merger is expected to take place subject to the due diligence and all the legal requirements that need to be met, somewhere around about early 2022, and if it's all plain sailing, it may be a little bit before that. The future of what will the future of the fund be known as? That is a $1 million question. We are working through that with our counterparts at NGS at the moment at board level, and once we come up with the right name, all our members of both funds will be told. There will be market research in the meantime. A very thorough process will take place, and from that basis we will come up with hopefully a name that the members of both funds will be happy with. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And so we're coming to the last question. John from New South Wales is asking the final question for the evening. Does the merger with NGS Super give you enough scale to make a difference? And I think it's only fitting that our chairman, David Hutton, answers the last question.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. As I've outlined earlier, clearly by increasing our funds under management from around 9.3 billion at the moment to 21 billion, our membership from 86,000 to over 200,000, and as Michael has alluded to, possibly some further growth after that. There may be some other funds that want to come with us, but we are keen to make sure that, what I can say is initially we believe there will be some very tangible benefits. Is it big enough? Well, again, I refer to Michael's comments about investment. You can get too big, and you can certainly get too big in terms of customer relationships. And neither fund, neither NGS nor ourselves are keen for that to happen. So we're trying to find what we call the sweet spot for a whole range of things, for our admin costs, our investment opportunities, and also the quality of our customer service, that we understand our people, we know our people. Those of you who work in particularly Catholic schools, Catholic care, Catholic centre cares, will know that our people regularly visit those places and they have an understanding of the type of work you do, the concerns of those sort of people, and also the values and ethos and the culture that they want in a fund. So yes, we believe that the scale will certainly be big enough to produce some benefits, but not so big that we will lose the things that our members and the staff that we have value very much. Thanks, Greg, for that.
Thank you, David.
So that brings us now to the close of the Australian Catholic Superannuation's inaugural member meeting. I'd like to firstly thank you, our loyal members, for your attendance, questions and the overall contribution to the continued success of our fund. I'd like to thank my fellow directors, our executive, management and staff for making today a success. I take this opportunity to remind you that much of the information we have provided to you tonight, as well as many of the answers to your questions, can be found on the Fund's website at www.catholicsuper.com.au or on our social media channels. We urge you to sign up for those, and our various Fund publications like our annual member report. So I encourage you to utilise these resources throughout the year and to contact the Fund with any questions you have from time to time. Just to mention too that our investment performance is published every month on our website, so you're free to see it there. So I hope you found the meeting informative and it reinforced your confidence in Australian Catholic Superannuation and how we're managing your money to ensure your retirement savings are maximised. Thank you very much and good night.